Harold was in his garage on a Saturday afternoon. He was sanding down an old side table, a gift for his daughter's new apartment. Nothing strenuous, nothing rushed. He'd done heavier work than this 100 times. At 71, he still prided himself on being the neighbor everyone called when something needed lifting. Furniture, fence posts, the occasional stuck car in winter. He liked being useful. He liked it maybe a little too much to notice when his own body started asking for a break. 20 minutes into the sanding, his jaw started to ache. Left side, near the back molars, a dull and stubborn pull. He caught himself pressing 2 fingers against his cheek, the way you do when you think a tooth is about to go bad. He also noticed he was breathing harder than sanding a table should make a man breathe. He blamed the dust in the garage. He blamed the dentist appointment he'd been putting off for 4 months. He finished the table, he went inside, he ate dinner and told his wife his tooth was bothering him. Neither of them thought about his heart, not even once, not for a second. There was no chest pain, no dramatic collapse, no hand clutched to his chest, no staggering to a chair. None of it looked like the movies, just a sore jaw and a slightly winded feeling. On their own, both seemed like nothing worth mentioning to anyone. That's exactly the problem, and it's more common than most people realize. I'm Dr. Walter Hale, nearly 4 decades of practicing medicine. Tonight, I want to walk you through 6 signs that your heart is already struggling. Sometimes for weeks before anyone calls it a heart attack. Almost none of them look like what movies and television trained you to expect. You know the scene. A man clutches his chest, staggers, collapses. That scene is real. It does happen, and I'm not asking you to stop watching for it. But it's far from the only way a heart in trouble announces itself. For a meaningful number of my patients over 60, especially women, especially anyone living with diabetes, it isn't how it announces itself at all. The real warning signs tend to be quieter, stranger, far easier to explain away as something else entirely. That's precisely why they get explained away, sometimes right up until there's nothing left to explain. Try something with me for a second. Picture the last time you felt run down for a few days and just assumed it was a bad week. Or the last time some part of you ached and you decided it must have been how you slept. Got a specific moment in mind? Good. Hold on to it. Drop it in the comments once you've heard tonight's list. I'd bet real money a few of you are about to recognize it as something you brushed off too quickly. Here's why this matters so specifically for people past 60, and it isn't random. The nerves that carry pain signals from the heart travel through the spinal cord. They run along largely the same pathway as nerves coming from the jaw, the neck, the shoulders, the upper back. Your brain gets these overlapping signals, and it can genuinely struggle to tell them apart. Doctors call this referred pain. As we age, that cardiac signal often changes, particularly with conditions like diabetes, which gradually damage nerve fibers over the years. The signal doesn't arrive as sharp, unmistakable chest pain the way it more predictably would in a younger nervous system. It arrives instead as something duller, more diffuse, far easier to write off. That's a significant part of why heart attacks in older adults, and especially older women, are documented in cardiology research to be under-recognized, treated later than they should be. Cardiologists have known this pattern for decades, not as a theory, but as a working clinical reality. It's exactly what caught Harold off guard that Saturday. There's a related fact that surprises almost everyone I share it with. A real share of heart attacks are only ever discovered afterward, on a later EKG, done for some unrelated reason, in patients who never experienced anything they'd have called an emergency at the time. Cardiologists call these silent heart attacks, and the word silent is doing a lot of work in that name. It doesn't mean nothing happened. It means whatever happened didn't announce itself loudly enough for anyone to recognize it. Some patients remember, once asked directly, a stretch of unusual fatigue they'd already filed away and forgotten, a tired week, an achy shoulder, nothing that felt urgent enough to mention at the time. Others don't remember anything distinct at all. For them, the heart simply did its work quietly, without asking permission first. That's precisely the gap tonight's list is meant to close. It's a large part of why this got a full episode instead of a few minutes inside a broader video about heart health. Let's go through the 6 signs now. We're starting with number 6. We're working down to number 1. That last one is the sign that once you understand the mechanism behind it, you'll likely never dismiss the same way again. I want you keeping a rough count as we go. Not just whether one sign sounds familiar, how many of them together sound familiar. That number matters just as much as any single sign on its own. Number 6, unusual fatigue that doesn't match what you actually did that day. Not the ordinary tiredness of a long afternoon or a rough night's sleep. A heavier, harder to shake exhaustion. It shows up doing things that never wore you out before. Folding laundry, walking to the mailbox and back, climbing the same staircase you climb every single day. Research tracking women in the weeks before a heart attack found unusual fatigue to be one of the most commonly reported early symptoms, present for days, sometimes weeks, beforehand. Just as frequently dismissed as stress or poor sleep, or simply the tax of getting older. Your heart, when it isn't getting enough oxygen-rich blood, has to work harder to keep doing its job. That extra effort gets paid for out of your body's energy reserves. Often it's paid for well before anything dramatic happens at all. Number 5, shortness of breath with noticeably less effort than it used to take. Carrying groceries in from the car, a short flight of stairs, even talking while walking beside someone. Any of these leaving you more breathless than the same activity did a month or two earlier. Doctors sometimes call this an anginal equivalent. It's effectively standing in for chest pain that isn't occurring or isn't being felt clearly by your particular nervous system. It deserves the same seriousness a doctor would give to chest pain itself. Not a lesser degree of concern just because it showed up somewhere else. Number 4, pain in the jaw, neck, back, or arm, with no chest pain involved at all. Exactly what Harold felt that Saturday in his garage. The nerve pathways from these areas and from the heart closely overlap on their way to the brain. Your body can misfile a cardiac signal as tooth pain, a pulled muscle, a stiff neck from sleeping wrong. It's a mistake worth understanding, not a coincidence worth shrugging off. If a new, unexplained ache shows up alongside other signs on this list, especially one that appears with exertion, it deserves a real conversation with your physician, not a same-week trip to the dentist or the chiropractor first. Number 3, nausea, indigestion, or a heavy feeling in the upper stomach that doesn't line up with anything you recently ate. Of everything on this list, this is the one patients have the hardest time believing came from their heart. A heart attack affecting the lower or back portion of the heart muscle can trigger a strong vagus nerve response. That response can produce symptoms close to a bad stomach, nausea, pressure just below the ribs, occasionally even vomiting. I've had more patients than I can easily count describe this afterward as food poisoning or a stubborn case of heartburn, right up until it turned out to be neither one. Number 2, a cold sweat with no clear reason behind it. Not summer heat, not exertion, not a fever, just a sudden clamminess that feels distinctly out of place for whatever you're doing. This is a classic marker of your body's stress response, activating as your heart struggles to keep pace. On its own, it's remarkably easy to write off as a passing wave of feeling unwell. Paired with any of the signs above it, though, it belongs on your radar immediately, not filed away as something you simply wait out until morning. And number 1, the sign every other item on this list has quietly been building toward: brief episodes of pressure, tightness, or squeezing in the chest. It comes on predictably with activity and eases once you rest. This doesn't have to be sharp or dramatic to matter. Many patients describe it to me as a heaviness or a band tightening across the chest, rather than actual pain. It typically lasts a few minutes and fades once they sit down or slow their pace. That's precisely what makes this sign so dangerous to dismiss. Symptoms that show up with exertion and settle just as consistently with rest. That specific pattern has a name in cardiology: stable angina. It's your heart telling you, as clearly as it currently can, that it isn't getting enough blood flow at the exact moment it's being asked to work harder. It frequently serves as the direct precursor to a full heart attack, sometimes days or weeks ahead of one. It remains one of the single most actionable warnings your body can offer you, provided you take it seriously the first time it happens, not the third or fourth. It's worth knowing exactly where the line sits between this warning sign and the actual emergency, because the two get confused constantly. Stable angina follows a predictable pattern, comes on with a certain amount of effort, eases with rest, roughly the same each time. The moment that pattern changes, that's when everything changes with it. Pressure at rest, with no exertion at all. Pressure that lasts longer than it used to. Pressure that shows up with less activity than it took before, or simply feels more intense. That's the line. You've crossed from a warning into what doctors call unstable angina, and that's treated as a true emergency. The rule I give my own patients is simple. The first time a new pattern shows up, call your doctor. The moment an established pattern changes for the worse, call for emergency help instead of waiting to see if it settles the way it always has. That's the one I actually want you to remember most out of all 6. It's exactly why I saved it for last instead of leading with it. Before we get to how Harold's story turned out, do me one favor. Subscribe now while it's on your mind. I want this list already sitting in your memory the day you or someone you love needs it, not something you meant to write down and never did. Back to Harold and how his week actually ended. 71, from a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina, and a composite, built from a number of patients whose cases have crossed my desk over the years, not one specific man. Nobody's actual privacy is at stake here, but I've watched this exact shape play out often enough that it deserves the full detail. He lived with that jaw ache for nearly a full week, blaming it steadily on a bad tooth he never quite got around to seeing anyone about. The way plenty of us let a small annoyance sit longer than we should. What finally moved him wasn't the jaw at all. His wife noticed something small. He'd started resting halfway up the staircase to their bedroom most nights, a hand braced on the railing, catching his breath before finishing the climb. 30 years in that house, and she'd never once seen him do it. She asked him about it directly, plainly, the kind of question that doesn't leave much room to change the subject. This time, he couldn't do what he'd done with the jaw all week. An EKG and a treadmill stress test at his doctor's office turned up significant narrowing in one of his coronary arteries, not fully blocked. Narrowed enough to explain everything. The jaw, the breathlessness, the stares. 2 days later, a cardiologist threaded a stent into place through a small incision in his wrist. It was over before lunch. No open surgery, no long hospital stay. Just a night of observation and a follow-up 2 weeks out. He was back in his garage within the month. The first thing he built once his cardiologist cleared him was a simple wooden step stool for that same staircase. Part practical fix, part standing reminder of the week he almost talked himself out of paying attention. His wife keeps a small note taped inside the medicine cabinet now, in her own handwriting. Jaw, breath, stairs. 3 words, in case either of them ever needs reminding again. I want to be direct about something before we go further. I don't want a single person watching this to panic over one ordinary tired Tuesday, or one stiff neck from sleeping wrong. Everyday fatigue and everyday minor aches are still, overwhelmingly, exactly that. What actually matters is the pattern, several of these signs showing up together. Symptoms that are genuinely new for you, not part of some long-standing condition you already manage, or symptoms that show up specifically with exertion and settle back down with rest. That combination is the real signal worth acting on. Not any single tired afternoon, considered entirely on its own. It's also worth understanding plainly why this pattern lands harder on certain people than others. The reasons are concrete, not mysterious. Women are significantly more likely than men to have a heart attack without the classic crushing chest pain most people picture. They present instead with fatigue, shortness of breath, or nausea as the primary symptom, sometimes the only one. It's a well-documented gap in recognition, not a rare exception buried in a footnote somewhere, a common enough pattern that emergency rooms have had to specifically train for it. It has real, measurable consequences for how quickly women get treated once they do seek help. precious minutes lost, simply because the presentation didn't match the textbook picture everyone, doctors included, grew up expecting. People living with diabetes face a related but separate issue in its own right. Years of elevated blood sugar can gradually damage the small nerve fibers involved in pain signaling throughout the body. It has a real name: diabetic autonomic neuropathy. It doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly, year after year, largely without symptoms of its own, until the damage is already done. That damage can blunt, or in some cases entirely mute, the chest pain a heart attack would otherwise clearly produce. For a patient living with diabetes, jaw pain, breathlessness, or nausea may be, quite literally, the loudest signal their body remains capable of sending, not a lesser version of the real thing. For them, specifically, the primary version they're going to get. That's part of why I ask every diabetic patient in my practice, every single year, whether anything on this exact list has changed. There's one more piece worth understanding before we move to what to actually do about all this, because I hear a version of this objection almost every week. But I had a checkup recently, and my heart looked fine. A resting EKG, the standard test done at a routine physical, records your heart's electrical activity while you're sitting calmly in an exam room. Stable angina, by definition, only shows up when your heart is working harder than that. A heart with a meaningfully narrowed artery can produce a completely normal resting EKG. It can still put on a very different show the moment you climb 2 flights of stairs or shovel a driveway. That's precisely why the story you tell your doctor matters as much as any test result. If you describe symptoms that specifically appear with exertion, it should prompt a stress test, an EKG recorded while your heart is actually working, not just a repeat of the same resting scan that already looked unremarkable. A clean resting EKG from 6 months ago doesn't rule out a single thing on tonight's list. It's one of the more common reasons real warning signs get waved off by patients who assume they've already been checked and cleared. I also want to say something directly to anyone watching this on behalf of a parent or spouse, someone who tends to shrug these things off. I know that's a real portion of you. The conversation works better as a specific question than a general worry. Instead of, "Are you feeling okay?" try, "Have you noticed yourself getting more winded on the stairs lately?" Or, "Has your jaw been bothering you at all this week?" Specific questions are harder to wave away with a reflexive, "I'm fine." They give a stubborn parent an actual detail to confirm or genuinely rule out, rather than a vague check-in they can deflect in one sentence. There's a practical piece worth adding, because knowing the signs only helps if you also know what to do the moment you notice one. If you experience that final sign, chest pressure or tightness that comes with exertion and eases with rest, don't wait around. Don't wait to see if it happens a second or third time first. Call your doctor's office the same day. Describe exactly what happened, how long it lasted, what brought it on. If the pressure is severe, doesn't ease with rest within a few minutes, or comes with several other signs at once, that's an emergency. The right move is calling for help directly, not driving yourself, not waiting to see how the evening unfolds. Time matters here in a way it doesn't for most symptoms. The sooner blocked blood flow gets addressed, the less lasting damage the heart muscle sustains. I also want you to hear this clearly, because fear on its own doesn't help anyone make a good decision. Catching this early, the way Harold caught his, is one of the more manageable turns a health scare can take. A stent placed for narrowed but not yet blocked arteries is a routine outpatient procedure for most patients, usually home the same day or the next morning. Cardiac rehab afterward, when it's recommended, is typically a matter of weeks of supervised, gradually increasing activity, not a permanent overhaul of the life you were living before. The frightening version of this story is the one where the signs get missed entirely. The version where they get caught is, more often than people expect walking in, a genuinely good outcome. Here's where tonight actually turns into something you can use. 4 specific moves. I want you thinking about your next appointment as you hear them, not some vague future one. First, write down the pattern, not just the symptom on its own. When did it start? What specifically brings it on? Does it ease with rest? Has it happened more than once now? Picture two ways of describing it to your doctor. Chest pressure for about 3 minutes climbing the stairs, gone by the time I sat down, happened twice this week. A doctor can act on that immediately. Compare it to a vaguer, I've just been feeling a little off lately. That one simply cannot be acted on with the same speed. Second, if you're living with diabetes, take unexplained fatigue, breathlessness, or nausea exactly as seriously as chest pain itself. For your particular body, it may functionally be chest pain, simply arriving through a different door than the one you were taught to watch. Third, don't let a new jaw, neck, or backache send you to the wrong specialist first out of habit. If it's truly new, unexplained, and especially if it shows up with exertion, mention your heart before you mention your dentist or your chiropractor. Fourth, if you or someone you love has several of these signs together, especially chest pressure with activity that eases with rest, treat it as urgent, not something to monitor for a while first, not something to see if it settles on its own by next week. Stable angina caught early is remarkably treatable, often with medication, sometimes with a straightforward, low-risk procedure. That same pattern, ignored for days or weeks the way Harold ignored his jaw, is how people end up in the exact emergency they could have avoided. Sometimes with one earlier phone call. One more thing before I let you go. This is aimed squarely at anyone who's already on a statin or about to be started on one after tonight's conversation with their doctor. That medication is very likely protecting the exact arteries we've spent tonight talking about. It can also cause a muscle ache most people never think to trace back to the pill bottle. I owe you that full explanation, and I'm making it the next video rather than squeezing it in here. Now that you've heard all 6, which one caught you off guard the most tonight, or reminded you of something you or someone close to you brushed off at the time? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read every one of them, and it helps the next person scrolling past take their own version of Harold's sore jaw a little more seriously than he did. I'm Dr. Walter Hale. Nearly 4 decades in this profession, and heart disease has taught me more humility than almost anything else in medicine. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't always send the warning you'd expect. Your heart rarely announces itself the way the movies taught all of us to expect. Somewhere along the way, most of us picked up a single dramatic image and mistook it for the whole picture. That gap between the image and the reality is exactly where too many warning signs slip through unnoticed. It's a small gap on paper. It's a costly one in a real kitchen, a real garage, a real staircase. Learn its real language instead of the borrowed one from the screen. Learn it tonight, not after. It gives you an honest chance to act while there's still time left to act.